Hi everyone. This is actually, I'll open the stream from my phone. 15 people are watching, so this is very unusual time for a stream today because Loris is from Australia, and for me it's 9 a.m., so pretty early. I hope my brain is functioning. So I hope I still remember the intro, so let me start. So hi everyone, welcome to our event. This event is brought to you by DataTalks.Club, which is a community of people who love data. We have weekly events, and this is one of such events. If you want to find out more about the events we have, go to the description, click on this link, and you'll see all the events we have in our pipeline. Then, very important, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. This way you will not miss out any future streams like this one. And last but not least, we have an amazing Slack community. The link is also in the description. Check it out, sign up and hang out with other data enthusiasts. During today's interview, you can ask any question you want. There is a link in the description, in the live chat. So click on this link and ask your questions. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen. And did you make the tweet?
Yes, I managed to tweet and I posted on LinkedIn as well. See if there's anyone awake in Europe at this time.
Yeah, unlikely. Or maybe like
Friday.
going to work. Yeah. Okay, so are you ready to start?
Yeah, whenever you want.
Okay, so let's start. So this week we'll talk about business skills for data professionals. And we have a special guest today, Loris. Loris is the CEO and founder of Discovering Data, where he's on the mission to build a bridge between business leaders and data leaders. Loris hosts the Discovering Data podcast, a show for business leaders for data professionals who want to turn data into outcomes. Welcome, Loris.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's crazy to be on the other side. I watched the show recently as a listener, and every time you're invited, there's this weird like Inception thing. Like you don't know whether what's actually happening. So it's super keen to be here. So thank you.
Yeah, it's always interesting experience to be on the other side. So, like not to host, but to be a guest.
Yeah.
So, before we go into our main topic of business skills for data professionals, let's start with your background. Can you tell us about your career journey so far?
Yeah, so sure. In a way, very typical for data people. I started out with a background in engineering, and then I got passionate about physics, and I thought for a moment I would become one day a researcher, a professor in quantum physics. Then I got to understand how academia works, and I realized that wasn't quite what I wanted. And the first sort of job that I landed after my PhD in quantum physics was data science, which aligned really well with a lot of the work that I've done in engineering as well, because my background is information engineering. So it's a lot about entropy, mutual information, statistics, a lot of statistics. And data science, as we know, is founded really on statistics. And so, yeah, I managed to convince someone that I could have done the job, and they hired me. And I was the first data hire in that company, a startup in marketing. So very,
That's amazing.
as you can imagine. Yeah.
So somebody without experience is the first hire in data science. That's success, right?
Exactly. It's typical 2018, right? Like that was the thing at the time. If you didn't have a data scientist, you were behind. That was the business perception. And so the chief executive said, okay, we need to hire a data scientist, and started asking around everybody, do you know a good data scientist? And a friend of mine said, well, I know someone that is pretty smart. And so that I had that classic conversation sitting at a table across the other side, is chief technical and chief executive. And they were like, okay, so we have a bold strategy and lots of complex business questions to answer. Now, you're clearly smart. You've done a PhD in physics, so you work it out. This is your desk. Here's your MacBook Pro. I'll see you and stand up tomorrow.
That's the entire interview process, or they actually ask some stuff.
That was my day one. The interview was actually very interesting, like yeah, we can talk about the interview, but the day one was that. And day two, the CTO looked at me from across the room during stand-up and asked me, okay, so when is the project going to get done? And I'm like, okay, things are fast here. So that was a bit of a shock coming from academia. But that's where I learned the ropes, and I ended up doing a lot of data management and data engineering just to get the data that I needed, and just to avoid using Excel, because at the time there was a very compelling business need. They wanted to create some models and integrate it into the app. So it was exciting. Like I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, we get to see the whole workflow from the source data all the way to the application and the user, and get some feedback and iterate. It took us 9 months to deploy the first model into production, which for me was forever at the time. And then I learned how hard it was for data scientists to put anything into production at that time. So I felt, wow, maybe I was actually lucky. Maybe it was actually an achievement to manage to deploy a model in real life.
What was actually the app was doing, and what was the model?
Oh, the app was just recommending. So Autopilot it's a SaaS business. Now they rebranded, so you wouldn't find it on LinkedIn. But what they were doing is just marketing automation. So you could create journeys and tag people and sort of make the whole workflow for someone in marketing a lot easier and more intuitive. The platform was incredibly flexible. Like we had this drag and drop functionality with blocks. There were actions and triggers, sort of similar to ConvertKit for those that haven't experience with that software, but way more powerful. Yeah, you could do literally everything, and it would natively integrate with everything else. And they had a lot of engineers. I think more than 30% of the engineering team was focused on integration. So the product was really, really cool. And my job was to make the dashboard and the reporting way more actionable, because the problem was information overwhelm. You will log in and you will find logs, real-time information on what was happening across all your campaigns and across all your contacts and leads. But it was very hard to focus the attention on, okay, here's what you can do right now to improve that campaign. So it was analytics, it was reporting and sort of basic descriptive work. And there was also some diagnostic work on top. And the idea then was to leverage the human intellect to cover the last part, which was prediction and prescription. So a bit of anomaly detection stuff, very simple from an algorithmic standpoint, but very convoluted from an architectural standpoint.
Which is interesting. So your background was engineering and physics, yet the job, the app that you worked on was in marketing, right? Which,
yeah,
like two different worlds. So how did you actually convince them to hire you? Was it enough to say like, hey, I know physics, so I'm smart?
Well, kind of like
enough?
they were a tech startup, right? So very technical people, and it was very easy to convince them, to be honest. Like it was one of the easiest interview processes. We started talking, and I described some of the projects that I worked on, because in academia, in the context of university, I actually done some really interesting work that never saw the light of the wider community. It was stuck in, published a paper, ended up on the IEEE, and that was it. But yeah, if you unpack that was a work on reinforcement learning. I was looking at non-polynomial hard problems for those in the audience that love mathematics, which I think most of them. And I used reinforcement learning to create basically a game where a bunch of actors would take actions, and their actions would compete and cause other actors to feel the effects of these actions until the network eventually converged to a non-optimal but very close to optimal solution in like record time, in like 30 or 40 iterations, compared to being an intractable problem if you wanted to approach it exhaustively. So that was cool. And then I just happened to meet this person that wanted to build a laser lab in quantum physics. And so I switched from whatever I was doing. When I saw lasers, shiny things, I couldn't resist. And I was like, let's do it.
Yeah, so previously in academia, your work was publishing papers on IEEE, and after you publish, the work is done. But now you join a company, which is a
Yeah.
completely different domain, marketing, and then to deploy something, it took 9 months, which was very unusual for you, right?
Yeah, I was expecting, I had the model, the basics of the model were ready to be tested on a, larger sample than what I had available, and do some basic A/B testing after a month from when I started. I just because I had that good friend of mine in engineering, so I said, "Hey, I need some data. So can let's beers on me, lunches on me, help me out." And so he did help me out, and he gave me a data set, and I built the initial models off of that. The actual integration live, that was a beautiful exercise of like learning how DevOps works and how the world of software development really works, which is very different from statistics and data science, as we know. So yeah, that was, exposure end to end, from the user needs to the engineer that needs to deploy a server in AWS to make that thing happen. And then eventually that engineer was too busy, so I took over that part. And so I became very quickly more of a data engineer than a data scientist. So luckily I knew the basics of coding, so I managed to survive. And eventually we published that stuff in production, which was great. And I moved more, and then I started developing this passion around like aligning people on concepts and trying to really understand what they're trying to achieve and map those requirements into data requirements. I found that part extremely refreshing and energizing, and so I focused on that, and that was a lot of fun. And
What do
it
you
was a
actually
hint to that. Yeah.
what do you actually mean by that? Aligning people on concepts and this entire thing. Maybe we can unpack it a little bit.
Yeah, sure. It's also one of our points in our outline for the talk today: data that makes sense, context, semantics, and meaning. Yeah, I guess I found the first hints that this was a problem when we're having a conversation during post the hackathon. We did a hackathon one day. It was fun. Everybody were free to spend one day solving a business problem they were in love with. And I found myself contributing to a customer success problem. And yeah, so we do that. And at the end of the day, we're drinking beers. And this friend of mine says something that completely shocks me. Like I remember essentially freezing and looking at her, staring at her in the eyes, and I couldn't believe what I heard. I was like, is this what you mean, or is that what you mean? And I realized that in that moment that we had two completely different understandings of what we did for 8 hours together. She built a picture in her head that was different from mine, and they were both very valid pictures, just not the same picture. And I thought, oh, okay, interesting. So in how many ways we can have different views of the world, even if we use the same words, the concepts that we associate to those words can be different if our backgrounds and our priorities are different. She was in customer success. I was more in data science and data engineering. So different
Customer
views of the world.
success. Customer success is it's sort of like customer support, or what is customer success?
And no, success was more focused on sort of the 5% customers by revenue, and try to get them to grow even more, because
Like account management, right?
yeah, but more focused on adoption and proficiency of the product, because even the big ones were actually not using the product, that were just scratching the surface of what the functionalities that we had available to them. So my work there was to analyze the usage of the product. So I was scanning the metadata, the logs that came from the Elasticsearch background that we had, and try to describe usage. So, but before I could even describe usage, I had to describe what good usage meant. And so we ended up doing the session on whiteboarding. What is success for the product? What are the key metrics? Is it the number of elements they use? Is it the complexity of the graph that they built? Is it the number of tags or advanced features? Is it the ability to export that information with other? And so integration and ecosystem building, because that potentially could have been a lead indicator for stickiness, and how and you could then argue that if people use the product and it's embedded, they use a lot their integrations, they're less likely to churn, because it's part of the ecosystem, is going to cost them time and energy to kill it. And so that would tie in with the lifetime value of the customer and all the business metrics that the business was following. So context to semantics and meaning, yeah.
You said something that is quite interesting, and I wanted to ask you about that. So you said that it's a lead indicator of stickiness. So what is a lead indicator and what is stickiness?
Yeah, good point. So stickiness is not the stuff you find on Scotch tape. It's more, I think, in the context of a SaaS, is the probability of churning, which means essentially canceling the account and picking a competitor.
Just like the opposite of churning, right?
The opposite of churning, yeah. Okay. So if you have high stickiness, people tend to keep using the product, and so their lifetime value increases.
And lead indicator, this is like some actions or some numbers, a figure that tells you that they're about to leave, or they are more likely to continue using the product, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I don't know how many people have ever seen in the audience a causal graph, but if you think about causality and a causal graph, like connection of nodes with arrows, and the arrows typically go one way only, could be that way or this way, but one way only. And a causal graph sort of tells you, okay, if this happens, then this happens, and then that happens. So it's about establishing a direction on that arrow. A lead indicator is sort of an event or some conditions that are very likely to lead to a transition to the next stage. And so in that case was churn, but it could be anything else. Yeah. For example, in my relationship with my wife, I know that my ability to keep a strong separation between my professional work and my home work is a lead indicator for how well we go along together and how strong and healthy our marriage is. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, it does. I interrupted you, sorry. So you were going to say something about context, semantic, and meaning, I guess.
Yeah, I think I learned over time that this applies a lot more with cross-functional teams and larger organizations than it does on startups. The fundamental mechanics of it are just cognitive biases and just the cognitive, structure, the way that we process information as humans, which is something that's always fascinated me. I never had the opportunity to dive deeper into the topic, but we see a lot the data knowledge, data information knowledge wisdom pyramid, which is one way of understanding the different levels in data. But I recently learned to extend that pyramid, and I'm in two interviews in particular, one with on my tongue, Jessica Talisman, on my podcast. The podcast title, a true data mesh, so semantics, ontologies, and then a true data mesh. And the other one with Ron Edelman. Ron has done a lot of work at the intersection of machines and humans. So he loves that machine-human interface. And it's just that multidisciplinary sort of stuff that really gets me out of bed in the morning, studying cognition, psychology, and how do we make sense of the world, essentially. And it's so messy because everybody has a different way of processing information and building pictures of what reality is. And so how do you align people on the same understanding, on the same thing? So very practically, an example is the definition of customer. It's the most used in the data management space. You ask someone in sales and have one in conceptual understanding of what a customer is. You ask marketing, they have a different one. And the problem is that these different understandings then reflect in the data and how people use the data to do what they do. And so as data scientists and data analysts, if we want to support the business to achieve the targets they set out as part of this strategy, we need to understand that different people might have different understandings of what we see as one metric, customer. How hard can it possibly be? There's one example from Scott Taylor. He tells me the story of the hospital with 170 definitions of what a patient is, and it's like, how can you possibly have 170 definitions of what a patient is?
How did they even count this?
Well, at some point, things broke and someone suffered, potentially physical suffering, not just psychological suffering. And it must have gotten to a stage where they engaged an external firm to do some audits, and they looked into the databases and they counted 170 definitions. It doesn't surprise me. So how do we use data to actually have an impact on the organization when we know that our cognition, the very system we use to make sense of the world, is so unpredictable and so random and so different? And that fascinates me.
I guess another good example would be definition of churn, right? So it could be, you can define churn or stickiness in so many ways, and then it really everything you do when you need to analyze data on churn depends on this definition, right? And if you use a different definition, then your analysis will be different.
Yeah, and in this one, I think this could be actually a fantastic introduction to the next point that we have in our outline, which is about, or maybe the last one. There's one point that I wrote around communicating, building better models by building relationships and earning trust, which really, it connects really, really well with communication and storytelling. Something that I'm really curious to hear from the audience. I didn't even conceive at the beginning of my career. For me, marketing was sort of the enemy. I came from
physics, right? From
from
reinforcement
physics,
learning,
man. So this is like science and hard facts and numbers. Everything has a standard deviation. Everything has a mean. Everything has a model that can describe it. And if you don't have a model, I can sample it and I can estimate the model. This theory and books written many decades ago on that. And to me, that was solid, verifiable, reproducible thinking. With marketing, I always saw it as magic, and I also associated persuasion as something very bad. You don't want to be the one that persuades people, because it sounds like manipulating them. It sounds like getting in their heads, right? So you want to stick to the facts. You want to show them the numbers. And I changed my mind. I changed my mind big time on that topic. I think like as data professionals, we don't do that nearly enough. And if you think about it, we're competing for the same amount of funding. There's only so much money that the organization has to invest in the projects, right? And we are competing against each other. The sales folks, the marketing folks, they know how to tell a story. They know how to be memorable. They leverage the way that our brain works, the way that we process information, not necessarily to lead the organization in the wrong way, just to have that edge, just to be remembered, really. And in data, we just blather a lot about databases and models, and we forget that we're talking to people that don't know what we're talking about. They really don't. They really don't know what we're talking about, with some exceptions. I mean, if you work in think about data maturity scales, 0 to 5, 0 being it's all paper, we barely use a laptop, and 0.5 being the majority of the organizations where maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe I think Doug Laney put it around 2, being like 45% of the organizations that they used for the statistics back when he was a Gartner we're between 2 and 3 in the data maturity space. And I think 2 is when you do have digital systems, but you don't really have a strategy. You don't really use data. You talk about data, but data is in Excel, in a spreadsheet that has no heading, no metadata, and the title is underscore V1 underscore final. That's kind of level 2, level 2. So it's still pretty bad. Level 3 is when you start having a bit of a function. You have a data team, maybe an analyst or 2. And 4 is when you start doing more predictive, and 5 is the prescriptive, but it's really embedded within the strategy of the organization. Most organizations don't really do that sort of stuff, and they don't have that data literacy high enough so that the business can understand what the heck are we talking about.
So how can we make business understand what we talk about? What
yeah,
can we learn from marketing to actually do that?
Yes, and this has been the focus of for me for the last year, to be honest, and it's going to keep continuing being the focus in the next 2-3 years. I think the key is to unlearn some of the concepts and the beliefs that we built up over time, especially for those that have resonated with the story that I shared and the way that I felt about marketing, and learn to see it in a different light as a tool, like any tool. We know that if we want to do classification, we can, hop on scikit-learn, and we have a whole plethora of systems that allow us to do classification. Just in the same way, if we want to have an impact in the organization, we need to use those tools. And a tool is a tool, right? It's not bad. It's not evil. It's not good by itself. It's just a tool. It's how we use it that gives that tool, the adjective. Is it good? Is it bad? Are you doing ethically? Are you doing it in the wrong way? But we can't just say, hey, because there are examples of people that are manipulating other people with marketing slogans, then I want to be a purist and I want to just, step back, walk away, don't even get my hands dirty. I think that was the mindset that I had to overcome and learn how to be like them, but retaining my intentions. My intentions as a data professional is to have any impact, to be honest. I hate the idea of working on things and just zero adoption is my biggest nightmare when I do any data work. It just doesn't feel good for me.
So how does somebody coming from this physics background, from this mathematical background, to work on marketing? So how do you unlearn these things? How do you start building trust with business people?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think it starts with active listening, but before you can listen, you have to learn to be comfortable with not knowing what the hell people are talking about, and it's incredibly frustrating. I have fresh memories because I just started a new position 2 months ago. I'm what's called now an industrial engineer, but essentially I'm an analyst, and I'm trying to help the business reduce costs, increase margins, and reduce waste, which is what data people do. That any business wants to do one of those things, if not all of them at the same time. And there's so much domain knowledge when you join a new company that it's overwhelming. I mean, I don't know, especially we live in a moment of volatility. So I'm sure that a lot of the listeners have fresh memories as well of what it's like to start a new job in a new organization. And it's awful. Like, we do it because we have to do it. And we can't wait to sort of go past that first steepest part of the learning curve so that now we are comfortable. We know where we are in the organization. We know who our stakeholders are. Stakeholder mapping is one of the first things you do in any new position. And sort of that gives us reference points. We build almost a map of what we're doing, why we're doing it, who are the people that we need to please, who are those we need to be careful. It's basic survival, if you think about it. And as a data professional, if you want to really have an impact, you have to get close to to the business. The business meaning like anyone in the organization that is trying to achieve something tangible and they are struggling to do it, or they have difficulties and they need help. So first you need to know who they are, what the problems are, whether the problems are worth your time. And so there's a whole prioritization of projects you can work on, because you're only one, right? As an individual contributor, at least. If you're leading a team, it's different, but the same principles apply. You still have to prioritize. And so that requires business literacy. That requires mumbo jumbo, going to meetings where people talk about stuff that, to be honest, we're not ready for. Most data professionals don't come from a business school. They don't have an MBA. They've studied technical stuff. The
I
engineers, the
don't know
developers.
anyone who actually went to MBA, like from
Yeah,
data folks.
because we don't need it, right? Like to get hired, you need to demonstrate that you have a prolific GitHub account and you are active on Kaggle. You don't need to demonstrate that you know business, but to have an impact after you're hired, you need to know how a business operates.
Mm-hmm.
You need to know to speak that language.
I think I wasn't completely correct when saying I don't know anyone. It occurred to me that usually the people who, I don't know, studied MBA, studied business, they don't start as junior data scientists, right? They start as like, I don't know, head of product or head of data, right?
Well, yeah. Well, I hope not. I hope not. Head of data and data lead, they're typically really technical positions.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it
Well,
depends where you
if you
are.
start with
Yes.
product, head of product, right? So this is a good place to, or maybe a product manager, right? And then you
Yeah.
become head of product, right? And then you get into data because you work with analysts. So eventually you might
Yeah.
become head of data, right? And in many organizations, actually, head of data or, I don't know, director of data reports to the product function, to the CPO or whatever, which is, I guess, fine. So yeah, but most of us, we study engineering, right? We study software, computer science, I don't know, economics, not business development.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we see that, the business talks about targets on specific values that they need to increase. They talk about penetration. They talk about differentiation and humanization of the product. They talk about education that they are actively doing to turn customers that leads that don't even they're not even aware that they have a problem, and walk them through the 5 stages from unaware to super fan. They talk about cost of acquisition for marketing. They talk about conversion rates for a campaign. Like every domain within the business has a language that is different from the other. And if you change industry, the language keeps changing. And plus, there is in addition to all of that, there is the lingo that is actually spoken by the people on the job, which may be filled with acronyms and inside jokes and the whole cut. And so you kind of have to become one of them if you want to win their trust and make them understand that you are there to try and help, that you by no means have all the answers, because these people maybe have been there for like 5, 7, 10, in the case of the company I'm in, 20, 25 years. Like I have 4 key stakeholders, and their average time that they've been employed in the same organization is 20 years, right?
Wow.
So I walk in as the data person, and I'm like, I have 0 domain knowledge. I need to learn from you, demonstrate that I'm genuinely curious. I actually want to learn what it's like to be you at work. What keeps you busy? What worries you? What are your aspirations? What do you want to achieve personally, as a team, and for the business? And hopefully those 3 are aligned, but in some cases they're not. And only once you have those that kind of a welcome, then you see that people open up and they come to you with ideas. So you don't have to chase for case studies. You don't have to do the research. The research is done by establishing those relationships first. Those are the foundations of I think, success for data professionals, and I don't see a lot of that, to
How
be
you,
honest.
how do you actually do this? So you join a new company, right? And then you said the first thing you do, or one of the first things, is you do this stakeholder mapping, right?
Yeah.
For each stakeholder, you try to understand what they do, why they do this, and you also want to prioritize, right? Understand who is more important, who you, like you said, who you need to please and who you need to stay away from, right? So how do you do this? How does it work?
Okay, so so you have to know one thing about me, and that's I have a terrible memory. So for a long time, one of the biggest challenges I had when it comes to like knowing people and it's remembering their names. I'm incredibly bad with names, like to a point that is almost ridiculous, right? And so how
Me
can you
too.
build relationships? Yes, it's like sometimes I avoid people because they recognize me. They call me by name, and I, for the love of God, I don't remember how their name, and it feels so bad. So I kind of try to avoid it,
Can
and
relate.
I've been stuck in that for years. Trust me. And so one day I learned about Notion. Now there's many systems. Well, okay, but Notion was one of the first. And when I learned it was the only one, I was like, oh, maybe I can build a system where every time I meet someone, I can Google them. Everybody has LinkedIn. Get a copy of their photo, attach it to the system, and build a database of people. I started
like
out
like
actually
CRM,
from
right?
kind of a
But
CRM
but for colleagues.
for colleagues. Yes, so
That sounds very creepy.
I know I know it's creepy and it sounds really, really bad, but it helped me enormously. So if you ask the how, like tactically, practically, how do I solve the biggest barrier to building relationships is remembering people's name, what they do, what they care about. So I don't take notes as, you meet someone over coffee, go like, okay, let me take notes about you. No, we're humans, normal relationships, but as soon as that interaction ends, I know that I have to do it. I have to collect that information, that knowledge, and resurface it whenever I need it. Otherwise, it's lost. And that helps a lot because we're humans, right? We want to feel acknowledged, recognized, respected, and we want to feel that sense of belonging and connection. And it's not manipulation. It's simply just, normal people are born with a solid memory. My memory is crap. So I need a database.
Second brain, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is your stakeholder mapping, or this is like stakeholder relationship management system?
No, this is just awareness of who is who and
Mm-hmm.
what the names are.
So that's
Then
like the first step, right?
the first step, yeah. This is just overcoming my terrible memory. Then step two is to attend business meetings, and there's many in any organization. Like from startups to enterprises, people talk business every day, all day, many times a day. Some of those meetings are more engaging, some are boring, but you'll never know which ones are valuable until you sample them. So I know it's crazy, right? I know it's absolutely crazy, something you would never do. You join and there's data in your title. What do? You just go around and get random invitations to Teams or to Slack and Google Meets to sit there, just basically look. It sounds like there is no meaning whatsoever. The first 10 meetings you go, it's just a different language. It's like when you go and visit a different country where they speak a different language. It's like, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no way I can understand the conversation. And that's where a lot of people quit. They go like, yeah, I can learn. It's so much better. It gives me good vibes. I can build models. I don't need that. This is bad for me, right? And that's where I think we need to go against our instincts, because the instinct tells you play safe, stay within the comfort zone, and just get attached to those pleasant sensations that arise when you know that you're on top of your work. That you know what you're doing, right? Nobody wants to feel like you're lost. But if you stick long enough, then those words start making sense, and now you start seeing patterns and connections. Rinse, repeat. You do it over and over and over, and after sooner than you think, actually. Within less than 3 months, I guarantee you that you start seeing things from a completely different perspective. And now those people recognize you, you build a habit of attending those meetings, and maybe you didn't ask a single question for a couple of months. Now the first question comes into mind. You'll ask it maybe privately, because nobody wants to ask a stupid question in front of like 40 people that may one day be your key stakeholders. So at the beginning you play safe, and then you build some confidence. And once you know what you know, and you kind of have a feeling for what you don't know, then you dare and ask one question and challenge what someone said. And it's just a wonderful thing, because most people are actually open to get fresh eyes, perspectives on problems. And you have it. And that's the thing that we don't see. The value of someone that attends a meeting from a completely different domain or department is that you don't have priors. Your prior is a uniform distribution to speak the language of the audience, right? You don't have biases. You haven't done the shaping yet. Everything is equally important and potentially interesting, or potentially not, just in the same way. And that is a superpower. And so if you can sell that, people recognize it and they open up, they talk to you, and now you have friends, you have new connections. It's great.
Do you have a system for that? So like you have this database with people to remember their names. Do you also have a system for taking notes after these business meetings? So then you remember, you can map concepts, you can understand who cares about which topic, like what is important for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that you can't do on day one, even knowing. So I come from, so it's been working on discovering data for 2 years now, and the whole system is built in Notion. So I knew the software really well, but I found that for the first 4 weeks, I couldn't even possibly think about it, because that's just all pure overwhelm. There's so much information coming to you that I think the only thing you need to do is get some, just chill, do some yoga, long showers, sleep, because there's a lot going on. But after week 4, you start seeing some patterns, and you're like, okay, now I kind of know what the business drivers are. We want to do X, we want to do Y. The net sales value has to be above that number. The margins on our products have to be above that figure. Cool. So now, what are the key activities that I'm going to focus on to try and sustain and support that business strategy? And your line managers know that, right? Because if you have a good line manager, even an average one, if it's been in the business longer than a year, they surely know what are the key activities that are more likely to support that strategy. And so you start from those priors. You don't have to invent anything. They will tell you, okay, two low-hanging fruits are 1 and 2. So we're going to start from those, nice and simple. And so I built a system literally based on those 2 first key activities. I try to map my actions and map them to the activities. I have notes. Notion has things like templates. So every time I have a meeting, I have button. That button creates a very simple, very bare bones template with, who am I meeting with? The date is automatically captured, the title of the meeting, and tags that tell you which key activity that those notes may one day support. And each key activity is a page. You open it and you have all the notes that refer to that key activity. It's just, but you could do it on a notebook, pen and paper as well. I just use Notion because it's
just
easier.
Wondering, do you use your private Notion account for that, or like you use Notion at work too, like it's a company's account? I'm just wondering. The reason I'm asking this is because at my work we don't use Notion, right? So there is a different system. It's Confluence. Like some people hate it, some people love it, but this is what we use. And I'm wondering, if I want to implement this, should I just use my Notion account, or maybe I should use whatever company has?
It's a wonderful question. I started out creating an account specific for work, and then I realized that Notion is literally my second brain. So my ideas, my knowledge, the things that I develop are all there. So it makes sense to continue doing that. in saying that, it could be tricky depending on, so I don't want to offer legal advice, but do read your contract and the intellectual property clauses of that contract, because you might be in breach. So the way that I resolved it is by creating different access roles and just segregating. I have databases that are within the same workspace, but that's specific for so that there's no accidental sharing with other collaborators for my business and stuff like that. Just something to be careful. But
Okay.
but yeah. Yeah, we talked about like prioritizing. Prioritizing is a big one. And the question that's interesting to me is, once you reach a steady state and you start being productive, you're part of the business, you attend meetings, now you are independent, right? You can decide and propose even a use case or a project to the business. How do you prioritize those use cases? And that's where I think you turn from you really make the transition from onboarding to leading your function, or being on top of the work that you do. Yeah, I'm curious to hear from the audience if anyone has a go-to framework to prioritize. What do you focus on? How do you make that call? Is it dollar value impact? Is it impact on people and how they work? Is it long-term thinking stuff like data management, cleaning data? Is it transitioning to a data warehouse? Yeah.
So the way I do it may be not the most scientific way, but just by talking to people and understanding what they care about, like what are their goals, what are the goals of their department, and they say, okay, this, and this is important to me. And if I talk to multiple people and multiple people say that this item is important to them, then this means that this piece of work will make more people happy, right? It will contribute to whatever they are doing. And this is pretty simple, right? So you don't think about like money, which you probably should at the end, or I don't know, some other impact, but like how many stakeholders this thing can make happy. Which
Yeah,
I
it's a
guess is a
fantastic way.
valid way of prioritizing too. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, it makes me think of network and social media, right? Like when you find the nexus of a graph, it's a node that is highly connected. In this case, the graph is the nodes are data projects, and the edges are how many people that data product essentially can touch. And yeah, the difference is that those products don't exist yet. They're just in our head, in our imagination. So that the job is to really understand where the business is going, find those opportunities. And it's like marketing. You know, when I title a podcast these days, I come up with like 5 or 6 different options for a title, and I pick one. The other 5 or 6 are gone forever, right? And that's where agility really comes in. You know, that it's not because, you know, we just learn about a particular algorithm and we find an opportunity to use it. A lot of people do that. To be honest, I've seen it over and over. We are curriculum driven development is a thing. People want to get better specific things. They know that the average tenure in the industry is low. So I met people that were like, look, I'm just being realistic here. I'm not going to be in the job longer than a year and a half. And so I'm just taking every opportunity I can to work on the stuff that I think is hot or is going to be hot, or the market, there's a big market for it, and then jump ship and negotiate a bigger salary. That is one way of approaching the problem, right? I don't think that way. And so the community that I'm trying to build, a discovering data, my podcast is for people like that, for people that, of course, I have a mortgage to pay. Of course, I want to negotiate a bigger salary. But what gets me out of bed in the morning is to see that I do work, and that work has an impact on real people. And I can put a dollar value figure on that. And look, I don't know if it's because it's nice to feel that someone comes in and say, "Hey, Laura, it's good work." I don't know if maybe I'm addicted to that feeling. Maybe I'm addicted to the
We all are.
brainstorming and the learnings.
That's
I don't
very
know.
human, right? To
Yeah,
get addicted to good things when people say good things about you.
it's just nice. It makes you feel that you're consequential. You know, that is, you're not just doing stuff for the sake of crunching numbers. You are actually having an impact on someone or some teams or maybe a whole domain in the organization. That makes me feel so much better. So for people like that, yeah, sorry, I cut you off. You say something.
Yeah, I just noticed that there is a comment from Alejandro that I wanted to acknowledge and read. So he's writing that I have an MBA, and precisely, so we talked about people with business background, right, starting in data, and he restarted from an individual contributor position again. And this shift is not easy. I'm still figuring out how to profit from that generalist business knowledge. So this is quite interesting. And I wanted to ask you from, like, I think most of the listeners are not coming from MBA, but coming from more like quantitative background. How do we get this business knowledge? How do we start supporting business strategy? How do we, because one of the things we wanted to talk about is like, how can I sit with people who are making important decisions, strategic decisions, and how can I speak the same language? So we already talked about this stakeholder mapping, understanding what they care about, prioritizing things, and then speaking the same language with them. But then what's next? Like, how can I actually contribute my data knowledge to these people? How can I support these business decisions? How can I support business strategy?
So I'm going to give you an answer that is counterintuitive. The answer is that part is actually the easiest.
Okay.
But and this is a huge but, it requires flexibility in the way we manage our identity. As data professionals, we identify ourselves with the depth and breadth of our technical knowledge. That is it's great, but it's also a barrier. So the biggest transformation for me is to learn, rethink who you are, right? And decouple the identity, your identity as a professional, from the tools and the technologies you use. The reality is that you can the 80-20 rule applies in anything, the Pareto principle, and applies to data projects as well. So there's 20%, the 20% you can do that gets 80% of the value most of the time for new case studies, things that are experimental, is Excel. And yet we see on LinkedIn literally wars between people that sustain that Excel is bad and people that sustain Excel is good. And I've been a victim of that. I took very sharp stances on that position, and I said, from a data management perspective, Excel is the enemy. Is the reason why data is crap. Yes, there's truth in that, but it's not
that's
one or
definitely
the other.
True.
That's true, right? That's true, but that doesn't mean that we need to go sort of ban it and go like, I'm never touch Excel again. Give me a Python client, or I'm out of here, because that blocks us from having those conversations.
You can do a lot of nice things quickly with Excel without, even starting your Jupyter notebook. You just you just open the CSV file with Excel, and then you play with the data, and then
a pivot chart, a pivot table. I mean, that's a super power. It's like, to be honest, it's even better than Jupyter. I mean, the how fast it is and how easily you can share it, because we don't think about that, right? But the other side, we're not dealing with monkeys. We're dealing with people that have brains. They want to understand what's happening, and they even want to feel good about it. That collaboration that they just established, so that it was an experiment to see if it's worthwhile considering you as an ally, as a partner to what they're trying to achieve. That's an experiment when you start, and you have to prove that it's worth it. And what we don't think about is we need to also worry about how these people feel. If I come to you with my Jupyter notebook and I showcase all my explorative data analysis and that package that does all those cool graphics, yeah, maybe there is a wow moment. But then the next thought, most of the time, is, oh, geez, he's so smart, that's a big brain and I'm behind. And now I don't even know how to launch a bloody Jupyter notebook. I don't even know what it is. And now all that work is inside your head as a data professional. Instead of initiating a conversation, it becomes a monologue. And that's that's the problem. It kills the conversation, and we want those conversations. The more conversations we have, the better we understand the domain, and the higher is going to be the impact of the models that eventually will touch Python. We'll get there. We'll do predictive and prescriptive, but first we need to do description and we need to do diagnostic. We need to be able to answer the question why. That is the most burning question for most businesses. People don't know why things happen. And yeah, Excel is not the only tool. You can get definitely to the description stage, and maybe with some, using your brain and your domain knowledge, you might even be able to do diagnostic without even touching machine learning. But are you going to be okay with that? And that's why I said that it's going to be a clash, an identity clash. We need to let go of the fact that you're cool if you use machine learning, you're boring if you use Excel. That is nonsense. That is completely missing the point. The point for us is to support the business. If the business needs Excel in that moment, we need to be okay. We need to step up, like grow up, essentially, and go like, okay, this is the tool, doesn't identify me. I use whatever it takes to serve the business. And are you ready to do that? That's the question. Not everybody is.
Something happened with your video, I think. So you're still.
Ooh.
I realized it's so difficult to talk. Oh, now it's good. So and then on YouTube, it was for the last 5 minutes, just my face, I guess.
Oh, ouch. I have you projected on the screen and just.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, now it works. Thanks. Yeah, we have a few questions, and one interesting one from Rafael is your sound is very good. How to learn to speak online?
Oh.
Is it only trying, or did you do something else for that?
Is the sound as in the quality of the audio or the speaking?
Yeah, but I think it's both. Not just like a microphone is important, right? Then,
yeah.
But that's not the whole thing, right? So
yeah.
for example,
I
you
host
can
a
have
podcast.
like, yeah, but like, how did you try? How did you actually learn to speak online? Was it just practice? You thought, okay, let me host a podcast, and then you just learned to speak online, or you did something else before that?
I I did something that was atrocious. It was incredibly painful. Listening to yourself after a recording.
Ooh.
It was one of the hardest things.
No.
Goodness
That's
me.
like terrible.
I wanted to run away. Yeah, it's so weird. And people say, you get used to it, but yeah, I'm still working on it, on getting used to it. But when you edit your own podcast, you realize how much you blather without really. Yeah, you learn to speak in a way that it's different, like varying the tone, taking the time to pause. A lot of us are actually afraid of silence. It's
You're
something
very
that's
good at
uncomfortable.
this. Like I noticed that in this episode, like the pauses were really nice, like as if you practiced.
Yeah,
you did practice, right?
No, I didn't. No, well, I host a podcast, so after 55 interviews with people, you do find patterns, and you're like, in editing, I'm like, why? I should breathe. Sometimes that's where it comes from realizing how suffocating it is to just keep talking without breathing. Mm-hmm. And from the listener perspective, when you take that pause,
they can breathe too.
You allow them to breathe. Yeah. And it's so much easier to follow the podcast. So I don't know if that works, but
okay. We should be wrapping up. So maybe last question I will ask you is, do you have any book recommendations or resource recommendations on the topic of today's interview? Like what kind of book we can read to learn more about business skills? Or would maybe you recommend your podcast for that and you don't need any book for that?
Yeah, it's a good question. To be honest, I've been looking for a book like that for a while, and I'm kind of dreaming to write one myself because I couldn't find a book on the topic that is connected, that speaks the language of data professionals. There's plenty of books on businesses, but you read them, you're like, this is not for me. So no, I'm sorry, I'm not aware of any books. I do have a podcast that people that are interested in the topic of getting more um, impact out of the work they do, they can definitely check it out. It's called Discovering Data, discovering.data.com. We just launched yesterday a Discord server. So unlike DataTalks.Club, our community has myself and my podcast assistant at the moment on it.
Two
But
people.
the server is open. Yeah, just two. So whoever comes in, don't expect a polished system, but we've been running now for 2 years and we have so many sort of people that reached out and say, it'd be nice to have a space to hang out and share thoughts post episodes, even before the episodes. And my sort of vision for next year is to use that space to grow, to fill this gap that we all kind of know it's there. It's kind of the matrix, right? You gotta take that red pill to follow the right rabbit and see what is there, because some people, most of us, really don't even know that there is a gap.
Okay. So to join the Discord server, what do I need to do? Do I need to go to Discovering Data website and then scroll down and then
In the
find the
future,
link?
yes. At the moment,
In the
since
future.
we are a business of one, it's way
Okay,
more simple. It's simpler than that. So you go on whatever you listen to your podcasts,
I
you
see.
follow Discovering Data, the last episode, the one with Steven Shedlesky. The guy worked 10 years with Simon Sinek, and he's an absolute authority on the space of psychological safety, leadership, that kind of stuff. We had a fantastic conversation. I mean, he's like incredible speaker. Absolutely recommend it if you're looking for speakers for your podcast, by the way. And in the show notes of that one, you'll find a link to the
Okay.
Discord server. So definitely join, and happy to see you there. Maybe we can bridge this the gap together. So much more fun.
Yeah. Thanks for the chat. It was amazing. Nice to talk to you. And thanks everyone for joining. I did not expect that so many people would join so early. So thanks everyone. That was fun.
Thanks to you, and anytime, hit me up on Discord or on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with anyone in the audience.
Yes, so we'll include on the contact details, and you perhaps will also send us a link to your Discord server, which we'll also include in the description.
I can definitely do that.
Yeah. Okay, nice talking to you, and have a great weekend.
You too. Ciao.
Goodbye.